And warning, this story is distressing. The most shocking example I've seen recently was the cold-blooded murder of a young woman in Charlotte, stabbed to death on a train as she travelled home from work. Irina Zarutska was a 23-year-old refugee who moved to America to escape war in Ukraine. A vicious murder captured on CCTV. Now, Charlotte's Democrat Mayor, Vi Lyles, first tried to suppress footage of the murder, footage you just saw. She even thanked media outlets for not showing it. She wrote on social media, "I want to thank our media partners and community members who've chosen not to repost or share the footage out of respect for the victim's family." And then she put out a statement urging compassion for the murderer, DeCarlos Brown, a diagnosed schizophrenic with a long criminal history, who'd been released back into the community after he'd provided authorities with a written note promising to behave. Joining me now is Sky News host James Morrow. James, help me understand why the left always seem to advocate for criminals.
Well, James, it's a very, on one level, it's a very easy explanation. On another level, it's a very complex explanation. But basically, at heart, the left is a revolutionary. The left wants to take down the pillars of society. Thus, in every single dispute you ever see the left involved in, you will find them coming down on the side of whichever side is more undermining to the foundations of society. This was the case through the French Revolution. This was the case through the 60s. The Rolling Stones saying it, every cop is a criminal and all the sinners saints. This is a deeply embedded idea in left-wing culture. And now this case in North Carolina, of course, is terrible, but it also brings up two other really interesting elements. Number one is media, because of course the media didn't start talking about this until the footage made it out onto the internet and people started talking about it. And then the other uncomfortable question is one of race, and people started to talk about whether or not there was a racial potential motivation in this crime. And, these are all areas that the left are really uncomfortable with, James. And I can tell you right now, that thing from the mayor where they were talking about, we don't want anybody sharing the camera footage. You just watch. There is going to be a concerted effort on the left to shut down people's ability to film and use footage of incidents, because they've realized over the past few years that once the truth and the footage of an incident is out there, they can't control the narrative and turn it into, something that it wasn't. So this, I think, is a really important cultural case here, James. And I'm glad you've brought it up.
And of course, if it had been a white man stabbing to death a black girl, I'm sure the media would have rushed to have covered it for the reasons that you outlined, the ideological stance of the left. The other thing I want to ask you, James, this horrific murder began with the killer getting on the train without a ticket. I would contend this is part of the problem we have in the West now. We seem to wink at small infringements all over the place, then we wonder why we have a crime crisis.
James, I could talk all night about this. I won't, because we've only got a few minutes. But I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in New York City before Rudy Giuliani became mayor. And back then, it was really, really bad. And, there were literal pogroms taking place against Hasidic Jews in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. This is not a joke. You can look it up. And it was a terrifying time to be young there, and you couldn't take the train or anything like that. Rudy Giuliani came in, and he brought in what was known as, and is still known as, the broken windows theory. And you start to have tolerance for, little crimes, and then it sends the message bigger ones, and it snowballs. But there's another element here too. In this video, James, we saw everybody sitting there. Nobody wanted to act. And I contend to you that the reason why nobody wanted to act on this is because of what happened to that young Marine. I believe his name was Jordan Neely, but correct me if I've got that wrong, who stopped and intervened when a schizophrenic was threatening people on the New York City subway, and that person died, and they tried to make an example of him and destroy his life and send him to jail forever in a jurisdiction where, it's pretty hard to get sent to jail for anything. So people would have seen that case and said, I'm not getting involved now, because we have to let the criminals run things because otherwise I'll be ruined. And it's so demoralizing to a society. And this case, I am so glad that it's being talked about because, as great as it is for Donald Trump to talk about crime and, the National Guard and kicking out the illegals and, cleaning up Chicago, it's this sort of thing that remains a local governance problem and a cultural problem on the left. And, everybody's going to be not on the side of the criminal here. And this has huge political implications, I think, going forward.
James, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but footage like that suppressed by the authorities, it just undermines the public faith in all institutions, and then you just end up with chaos, right?
Of course, because, what have they got to hide? They're clearly hiding something if they don't want people to see it. Because why? Because there's a prescribed narrative that they want people to think, and that is that the killer was the victim and that somehow the victim had it coming to her.
Indeed. James Morrow, always appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining me tonight.